Okay, hi everyone. We are live. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Beth Holland from EdTech Teacher, and I'm super excited for tonight. Is we pulled together a great group, and we're going to have a big fun conversation about this whole idea about students and publishing and ways to get them really excited about writing. So I'm going to start with my colleague Avra Robinson, who's worked with me at EdTech Teacher, and then we'll introduce our special guests and get going. So Avra, I'm turning this over to you.
All right. Good evening, everybody. I'm Avra Robinson. I am here in Northern Illinois, about an hour outside of Chicago, and really excited to be here with this amazing group of educators tonight. Shall I turn it over to Shaelynn?
Go for it.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shaelynn Farnsworth. I am a school improvement consultant for the state of Iowa, and I specialize in technology and literacy and AIW. It's nice to join you guys. Thanks for having me back.
It's always fun to have you back. And then we've got Erin, who this is the first time I've ever seen Erin sort of in person, but we've chatted online. So Erin, I'll let you go ahead.
Well, hello. Thank you for inviting me. I'm Erin Olson. I'm an instructional technology consultant with Prairie Lakes AEA for the state of Iowa, and I'm very passionate about literacy and its connection to technology and all that it can empower. I love that I get to be here with you, so thank you.
Well, super glad to have you. And then we decided that we should have renamed this webinar like Craig and the Ladies, so we're super excited to have Craig. And now that I made him laugh, I'll let him introduce himself.
I should have never replied to the tweet, your conversation. I am Craig Badura. I am the integration specialist here in Aurora, Nebraska, right in the middle of Nebraska, and I'm excited to be here with all of you awesome educators here.
All right, thanks, Craig. So I'm basically surrounded by the Midwest here this evening. I didn't say it. I'm in Newport, Rhode Island. We were discussing the fact that I have more snow than Avra does in Illinois. But Craig also really hit on this. Like this whole conversation started with a tweet, and I can't even remember now who started it. It was one of you, and we decided that it would be really fun just to have a conversation live with everybody else and not just keep all of the fun to ourselves. So just to get things started, I'm just going to throw this out there and then be quiet. But, you know, we did want to start talking about, like, how do we start encouraging students to publish to a broader audience? And so I'm hoping that you guys can take over and share some, you know, some lessons learned, some things that you might share with other educators who are just getting started. I know my personal, like, first experience was actually my middle school students desperately wanted a school newspaper, and this was in like 2007, and I'm like, guys, we're really gonna print a newspaper? And so instead we decided to start a middle school blog, and so I had like all the kids as my student reporters, and they were sharing their ideas, and we had sports reports and field trip reports and things like that, and so it was really more on an informal basis. But I know that all of you have done way more than I ever did, so I'm gonna get out of the way and turn it over to whoever wants to grab it first. All right, Avra, it's all you because you weren't mic'd.
You want me to go? Avra, go ahead, Avra. Yes, me, you.
You.
I guess I blog personally, and about 6 years ago really got turned on to Kid Blog, and when I was a media specialist and an integration specialist at a neighboring school district, and I just really liked the fact that when kids were blogging and we told them that they would publish their work to a bigger audience than just mom or dad or the teacher, and instead of just hanging something on the fridge, it's amazing how much more detail that those kids would go into and how passionate they were about the writing. And so I've just really, Kid Blog's the platform that we use, although I know that Seesaw has a blogging feature as well now. We have all of our first grade team here at Aurora Public Schools. They all blog with their students, and I have a biology teacher that does it. I think his blog is called Weird Animals or something like that, and so his students blog us several times a month. And then I also have a psychology teacher and sociology teacher that she has her kids blogging. So it's just amazing to see the process and how kids just write, I think, in a more efficient manner when they know that it's going to go outside the walls of the classroom.
Yeah, my story's similar to Craig's. Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Good to go, Craig? Yeah. My story is similar to Craig's in that I knew I wanted to have my kids blog but I also knew that I had to lead the way. And so I forced myself to create my own blog. I think that was back in 2008. Just to kind of model to students not only how to communicate your message effectively, but also how to move other writers forward. And so it looks like Erin maybe is frozen, but she's probably going to join part of this story. When I started blogging with my students, it was more a creative writing aspect, but I realized that I couldn't keep up as a teacher reading everything that they wrote, because as a teacher I wanted them to write much, much more than I could possibly read. With that being said, we formed a blogging community. It was myself, Erin Olson, Beth Burns, and a couple people throughout the state, and we even branched out to other states and across country later on, but it gave the students a built-in audience different than the traditional known teacher, and that made a huge impact not only on my own practice, having people read my reflection and what was happening in my classroom, but it shifted the students' voice and what they were creating for the world, not just school for school's sake. So that was hugely important, and Erin's part of that journey and part of that story. But it was fantastic.
Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay, wonderful. So Shaelynn mentioned the blogging community, which was pivotal for my students in inspiring them to continue their writing and publish for an audience. But I remember when the school I was teaching at was going one-to-one, and it was a summer right before that happened, and I knew that I wanted to blog, but no one had ever taught me, and I didn't know exactly what I would have to offer a community of readers. I knew those would be the same questions and concerns my students would have, but I thought I needed to be a model of what it meant to turn your work into the world. And so on Twitter I met Shaelynn, and she actually mentored my entrance into blogging. And as I created my blog, I thought about all the components that exist in writing, about the design elements and how that adds to the meaning of the words that we're writing, and how those two things can support one another, and I wanted to share that with students. And so then my students blogged as well, and even though within that community all of us had a different writing purpose, my class was creative writing, and so they were blogging their passions. It was their choice, their design. It didn't matter. I saw an improvement in writing instantly because of that connection to audience, and how they could see how their passions could connect them through technology to other people with like minds, and how that could support and challenge their continued learning. It was never the same, and I remember one of my favorite days is when school tour administrators came through and asked my class, how many of you are going to continue blogging when you graduate, and all of them raised their hand, and that's powerful. So that I think the rest is history. I mean, once you're on fire and you have your students on fire, you know that there isn't going back to not turning your work in that way or not sharing in that format.
Well, I guess it's my turn. Those are awesome stories. I'm so excited to get to hear them. Before coming to EdTech Teacher, I was a technology integration specialist or technology coordinator in a really small school district here in Illinois. And I just first started having kids blog, and I guess one of the pivotal moments for me was I had second graders doing some just very basic blogging. I was teaching the technology classes, so for me it was more about not only the writing part, but that happened more in the classroom, but it was just the design of the blog and the technological pieces and stuff, because that was my class. And then in the 6th grade I had them blogging also. But in 6th grade, we were working more on like commenting and feedback and those kind of things. So we paired those two classes together, and so when we had the 6th graders kind of give comments and feedback to the 2nd graders, and it kind of blew me away that everything that the teachers had been telling the kids forever, capitalize your sentences, punctuation, things like that, or even just the formatting of things. Once the big kids told them that, it was like this aha moment, like, oh my gosh, and those little guys were so excited the day that they got to read the big kids' comments. I mean, that was just, and so it was cool. I mean, it was a community outside of their classroom. We weren't even outside the walls yet of the school, and yet that wider audience, that authentic wider audience, had really made an impact on them. And so that's one of my very favorite memories when it comes to my early days of publishing.
So just as a question, like when I first started, I had a lot of challenge. Like the idea of publishing wasn't accepted in the community, and this was a while ago. But just like having the kids online and having the writing online, and so I actually spent a long time working with the teachers, and we just trying to set things up to put in like precautions and everything else. So how do you kind of ease that transition in, especially like Avra, I was working in a preschool through 8th grade school, so I was dealing with elementary school students and those concerns, and then middle school students and the things that middle schoolers like to do. And so it was a balance. And I know, initially when I started with it, I actually had them submit their blog post through Google Forms. And so like they could fill in the form, and the English teachers had helped me set it up like graphic organizer templates. So it's like, what's your headline? Use good catchy action verbs, those kinds of things. Like, what was the setting? We had all these prompts. I was the one that was doing the work and was doing the posting, and it took some time of them realizing there was this like checks and balance in place before the community accepted it a little bit more. But I'm wondering, for folks who are just getting started or not so sure about the public aspect, like how did you transition that and bring the community along with you? Just an easy question.
One of the first things that started in my class was we were responding online to the blogging prompts with New York Times Learning Network. And so I think it's every day there's a question or a prompt that's connected to a news article, and then students can respond to that, and it posts on the New York Times Learning Network. And so we spent time looking through responses and as a class and seeing what we noticed, things that we liked, things that we perhaps thought could be improved, and then we entered that space. I found that my students were not hesitant. I thought that they'd be afraid to share, but they weren't. They didn't have the same hang-ups that I had, and that was interesting, because I thought I almost let my own fear of sharing my work be a barrier to my students sharing their work when it didn't have to be, and it wasn't. But that was one place, and I saw that Shaelynn posted blogging requirements, which she kindly shared with me when I was getting started with the students, and that was so helpful to have, to have that as we moved forward. But again, the New York Times Learning Network was a place that we started.
Just curious, I don't know that one, but is it still running, like the New York Times? Okay. Cool. And then for anyone who's watching, I'm actually updating the slides that are on this page as we're talking. So everything, Erin just mentioned Shaylynn's blogging rack, so I just dropped that link in. So if anyone's watching on our page, just look at the slideshow below, and we're filling in resources as we go. Cool.
I'm sure Craig probably has a lot to share on the digital citizenship side. He's kind of a master at that, but to kind of branch off of Erin's, granted we were at the high school level, so it's a little bit different than your elementary, middle school Beth that you were speaking about, but it was very transparent with parents and adults in the building, and so many teachable moments, from how to properly title your blog. Don't put your first and last name on there. What to call your blog, how to tag things to bring traffic to your blog and market yourself and hone your voice. So there's a lot of teachable moments that go in with publishing your work online through multiple modes. We chose blogging at the time. But I realized that my fear in the past, kind of what Erin was speaking about, was based on the decision of what's best for me and what's best for adults rather than what's best for kids. And when I shifted that mindset, so it was more focused on the kids, what would give them the skills to be better adults, better human beings, and to actually do work for real people and for work's sake instead of school for school's sake, it was just a shift in mindset. I was a little bit more open with the high school kids, allowing them to choose their own platform. I knew enough to be dangerous for each one, but I let them choose their own platform. The blogging requirements that I shared are bits and pieces borrowed from other educators who shared with me and compiled. And something that, we talked about the art of response, but something that I usually stressed with parents is, although these are open to the public and they do share them online, to have a predator, because that's often where parents go, actively seek out a child's blog address first would take multiple steps, and then try to contact that child undercover. You would more likely see them on Facebook or somewhere where there's pictures, rather than trying to seek them out through a blog. So having that kind of mindset that it was controlled and using it positively, but being transparent with parents, kids, community.
I think, just one thing that's always fun is like the idea of public too. And I talk to parents who, when I did start getting the kids doing more, they're like, oh, people are going to find them. And you have to work really hard to be found. Like, I think my most frequent commenter on my personal blog is my mom, because she doesn't realize that responding to like the emails would go to the blog. I get so excited when there's a comment because like nobody's reading. I'm like, there's no, I have 12 followers on there, So I think one of the things that's interesting is it's not as public, I think, sometimes as people think it is, but at the same time, there's such amazing lessons in terms of like, how can you get that audience if you need it, and how do you build that connection and build that responsibility, to be able to then write to an audience and know who you're talking to. But Craig, I think I just cut you off, so I'm going to be quiet.
Well, I was just going to talk. I love that Shaelynn and Erin both said the F word there, the fear word, and I think a lot of times I've written a blog post about that, is the F word holding you back in your classroom, and that's fear. And I'm glad they spoke of that, because I think too often that teachers are really afraid to jump into that, because I've never done it before, but your kids are using microblogging platforms like Instagram and Twitter and Vine, and they're already microblogging now. We just need to get it into more of a controlled environment here. And as Shaelynn talked about, we spend some time with digital citizenship, and our teachers do a good job of telling our parents, here's what we're going to be doing, here's the expectations. So they have to kind of hit some parameters before we actually start blogging. So yeah, I'm glad that they mentioned that as well, the fear piece to that. And as we're talking about that, it's hard to find those kids. I struggle with the fact that when they say, you tweeted a picture or you put that kid's name out there, and I never use a kid's first name and last name, but I kind of think when our local newspaper comes for family literacy night or a football game, and they put the student's first name and last name with a picture on the front of the sports page or on the front of the page, they're going to find that person's going to have a footprint online because of that, not because of a blog that we're doing in the classroom. I mean, I really encourage our older kids to have that footprint with that blog and take that with them when they leave high school. But that just got me to thinking about that conversation. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah, it's a good conversation to have, though, Craig. I will not ever forget the day that my daughter told me in no uncertain terms, Mom, we don't use Facebook anymore. The grown-ups have taken over Facebook. I mean, she was like 11. And I had let her onto social media early on purpose, because I was trying to keep a tab on what was happening. She was in my school, so I kind of felt like I had the inside scoop. And so, of course, at first I didn't let her have her picture on there, and I made her post on there that she was a child under the supervision of an adult, so on and so forth. But I do remember when she stopped using it. And so then I was like, well, what are you doing instead? And so that was my way, as both a teacher and a mom, to kind of figure out what was going on. And they were on Instagram, or they were on, Twitter or other social media platforms. And so it was a good thing to tell parents. And parents a lot of times thought if their child didn't have a smartphone, that there was no way they could be doing those things. They didn't understand that even an iPod with the Wi-Fi connection, those apps were there, and so that it was taking place. And I remember telling elementary parents, like Club Penguin, the kids are creating this digital footprint already for themselves. They are creating personas online, and they have usernames, and they're chatting in some cases. And so, like you were saying with the microblogging. So, for me, it was a natural progression and a great time for that conversation to get to take place in my classroom, saying, this is something they're already doing. You're already out there sharing online. Let's talk about ways that we're going to do it within the classroom responsibly and safely, and all of that with the digital citizenship stuff. So.
You mentioned talking about the digital citizenship aspect. My high school creative writers became blogging partners to an elementary class, and so every other week they would meet together and they would talk about their blogs and share writing. And one of my high school students decided to shift the focus of his blog because he realized one of his audience members reading was, a fourth grader, and how that changed the words he chose, the clips that he chose to use in his blog. And just as we have things to offer to help our students with digital citizenship, it's interesting how they too can support one another in that venture.
I think the student-to-student connection is really powerful. I remember when my daughter, she's 15 now, but I remember when she was little and she would talk about the big kids, those pretty eighth graders that were, in the other class, in the other hallway. And now she's flipped it, and so she loves the little kids, and so when they're in high school, they love, a lot of them, to be that role model for the littles, and then the little guys love to look up to them. So that's a neat thing, because when they can team together like that, then it's powerful.
I mean, outside of more of the writing projects and things, have you been, seeing how the difference in terms of how students are taking ownership of their work, or even the types of projects and the type of activities that they're seeking out when they know that they can actually share it to a broader audience? And Erin and I know you and I have talked about this, and Avra's laughed at me a lot about this over the fall, but just, I know, not being a student again, the amount of time I spend working on things that go public, it's a very different editing process, and it's a different thought process than sometimes things that, are just being turned into one person. And I even was speaking to my advisor about it, where I said, I kind of wish that as a requirement of the course, I had to publish things, because I think I would actually take things in a different direction, or I might push in a different way if I knew that it was going beyond just this is your academic assignment, work through the rubric. I mean, I understand the rigors of the writing, but I think there's something to knowing, that there is going to be that broader audience. And so I'm curious what you've seen, sort of across the board.
We've had a teacher this year right next to me, if I can go now. Is that all right? Miss Clavon, and she took her, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. She took her American History or Honors History class this year, and instead of giving an assessment at the end, like she's done, she said, I just want to change it up. I want to have the kids have more ownership. And I said, well, let's use our live streaming. We subscribe to a platform called Strive TV. It's locally here in Nebraska. Taylor Siebert does a wonderful job with that. And so literally she's live streaming their presentations. And so when she told that to the kids the first time, it was like, wait a second, you're going to put it on Strive? So anybody in the world can watch this. And it's kind of neat going back at the end of the day and seeing how many hits we actually got, or people that tuned in. And so it's those kids really, it's amazing to see how they fine-tune their presentations and really take that ownership in, knowing that anybody literally anywhere in the world can tune in if they hit, see that tweet, whether Brenda tweets it out or myself or our high school principal tweets it out. So that was really fun to see, and they just got done doing the first round with a new term here just yesterday, so that was fun to watch.
So I have a great example for you guys. I call it my Hamlet example. You literacy nerds will enjoy this. There's multiple ways to publish student thoughts, and one way is through student-led Twitter chats. And Erin probably remembers this, but we got a group of students together and we had leadership chats on Friday, and the kids loved it. A teachable moment arose where somebody was misinterpreted and they were called out and completely nasty to the nicest girl in my school. She was like wholesome goodness, and everybody loved her and everybody felt bad, and it was that pause in the Hamlet mindset. And they really had three options. They could just give up and not do anything, right? Or they could fight and look as nasty online and ruin their reputation and keep the fight going, or they could change it. They could address it in a way that kept the conversation moving forward and left the emotion out of it. So one of those great things happen quite frequently in the classroom. You just have to keep your eye out for it when they have that audience. Again, different than the traditional lone teacher, their message is important. It can be misinterpreted. And how are they going to do when something doesn't go right, when there's a mistake?
And you know, you mentioned the mistake. Like, one of the things that I know has always been a challenge, but it's nice knowing that it can happen and to have it scaffolded through. Is, you know, not everybody's going to always be complimentary, and so learning, you know, like when you ignore it, how do you deal with it? You know, I got a comment today where I'm like, I can't tell if this person's attacking me or if I just don't know what I'm talking about. You know, like it came through, and so like I think I'm just gonna let this go for right now. But you know, it's those opportunities. I think that it does open up, and it would be awfully nice to have, you know, had some of that scaffolding. You know, when I had a teacher beside me who could say, okay, it's all right. Here's how we deal with it. Here's how we can move forward. You know, instead of, you know, having to wait as an adult and say, wow, now what? When there isn't necessarily that support.
Yeah, Beth, it reminds me of, what's that acronym that's going around right now? I saw it on Tony Vincent's Instagram. It's like, when you see all this awesome stuff online and you don't know how to react and you don't know what to say and you're jealous and you want to, what it's like FO, what is that called? What's that called?
Oh,
Help me out.
Fear of missing out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. FOMO.
FOMO. There you go.
And that's huge. And that is part of our job as educators. With all of this social media and constantly online and their voice published, and I don't know why I led us down this conversation anyway, but fear of missing out is real. Having those feelings that, oh my gosh, I wasn't invited or whatnot, having that teacher, kind of what you said, Beth, to guide us there. Have you guys ever had any of that?
So I think, I mean, I think I met all of you actually when I spent, you know, 7 months on the couch with a broken leg. I had nothing better to do than like stalk everybody online and be like, well, someone talk to me. I'm all by myself. So, I mean, I know that's how I actually met a number of you. I was joking with the folks also in Nebraska at the iPad Academy. I'm like, yeah, I was pretty much Twitter stalking your first professional development workshop because I couldn't go anywhere. So, you know, it was just there and learning and seeing how things go. But I think that's one of those, you know, it's like a promise and a pitfall. You know, you can invite people in, and I think there's something else that's really exciting about being able to say, here, like, I'm willing to share my learning with you. I always love it when Jennifer Carey goes to conferences because she live blogs every session, and it's great. It's like you're almost there. You can live vicariously through her learning, and so, you know, there's something kind of nice, even as adults, to be able to say, look, you know, and maybe even to model that to the kids. Like, you can come learn with me. Here's what I'm learning as I'm learning it, and I'm willing to share that with you. So I've had that fear of missing out.
I got to a point, Beth, where, and all of you, where I absolutely wouldn't go on Twitter. Like when I wasn't at ISTE and everybody else was, it felt like absolutely, where I just was like, I'm just not going to read it because it was making me so sad. Saturday mornings, I love to just sit and read the Twitter feed, but a lot of times that's when awesome professional development is happening, and I'm not there. But, you know, one of the things I was thinking about when we were talking about fear, one of my fears when I first started doing any kind of publishing online was absolutely the fear that someone else had already done it, and not to be self-deprecating, but that somebody else had already done it better. You know, you guys all talked about starting your first blogs 2007, 2008. Well, it was like 12 for me before I even, you know, realized that those tools were there. And I just thought, you know, I'm from this little school in this little town, and, you know, what do I have to contribute to a wider audience? You know, I didn't mind putting my kids out there because I thought what they were doing was precious and wonderful, and everything that happens in the classroom is so powerful. But, you know, as an educator, I'm impressed that you guys jumped in and did it first to model for your kids, because that wasn't something I felt comfortable doing at first.
I have to tell you, it wasn't easy. I mean, I think about my adventure. Dealing with feedback, I had tweeted that my students were going to be back channeling, and then I'm taught in a little school with a cornfield in the back and cows across the highway. And the New York Times followed my teaching that week and put an article about back channeling, and there was a picture of my students in my class on the front page. So I was naive enough to think at that time that what I was doing was accepted by the larger community, that the world was okay with tech in a classroom. So I was naive in that, and I didn't have Facebook, so I hadn't experienced maybe that discourse online. I hadn't. And the comments on that article were unbelievable. My favorite that I still remember was that I was doing disservice and my students wouldn't know how to talk because of back-channeling in the classroom. I was the high school speech coach too, so then I thought that was really ironic. That's why it stuck with me. But my students saw me, saw that. They saw me deal with that, and I remember saying, like, this is awful. And they said to me, we deal with this on Facebook all the time, Mrs. Olson. And I was like, oh, okay. So I felt even more called to continue sharing and publishing and being a model, not only being able to deal with all of the good and praise that comes, the fluff, the yay, good job, that a boy, but also how to professionally deal with discourse. And what an awesome learning experience. But it isn't always perfect when students post, and there are comments like Shaelynn talked about. That was a powerful moment for teaching where everybody saw how to handle conflict. But they got to do it in.
And I do want to say, and I'm gonna interrupt Erin, but it was even more powerful when her students then replied to those comments. So
Yeah,
not only did she deal with it, but then she empowered them to reply back to those comments and seek justice for their teacher. So it was awesome.
Yeah, that was pretty awesome. I'm not gonna lie, that was and even more hilarious. You think about the reach of network. My brother was he's in the Navy, and he was stationed in Brazil at the time, and he saw it and commented, and all I could think about is, like, we're on the playground as little kids and there's my big brother. It was hilarious. And I can laugh about it now, but what an awesome, teachable moment for me, that I learned what the reality of that is. So when I say it wasn't easy, it wasn't, because we're attached to that writing, but to think that will never happen for our kids ever, and that we should protect them now, well, that's a disservice, because we can help them through that under our care.
Right. One of the social media apps that I detest the most that kids use, and I don't think it's as prevalent now, but it's this Ask. I think it's Askfm. It's something, but it's an anonymous thing, so you can just ask people questions anonymously. So, and of course with, kids, teenage girls especially, like, why is your skirt so ugly? I mean, terrible, terrible things. My daughter, when she was like 11, was on it, and I absolutely made her get off. Like, that's just a terrible world. But the experiences that you guys are talking about creating, they're armed, they're ready to be able to deal with these kind of experiences. That's awesome.
I think a lot of teachers don't realize that they're teaching those experiences, like Shaelynn and Erin talked about. That's powerful. That is great. That's a great benefit of doing what they did. And so I too often think, again, that those teachers think that fear of their own fear, that personal fear, is kind of holding them back in their classroom. So I just wanted to start clapping when Erin was talking there. That's so true about the experience of that and how that all played out.
I mean, Sue, if you were to, like, advise a teacher that was just getting started, like, what would be, like, where would you begin? And then, I mean, I just sort of one thought, or Shaelynn, I just saw that you have a question for the group. You can ask that first too, which is totally fine, because I started talking and then saw that you posted. So Shaelynn, I'm just going to let you take it over, and either you can answer that or ask a different question.
Well, it kind of relates, in my mind, to what you just said. So how do you start? Where do you begin? What tips? And kind of posing to the group, I'm seeing a reemergence of podcasting. What do you think are hot platforms for teachers and students to publish their voice on now? We're seeing a lot of microblogging, we're seeing vlogging and videos and podcasting. Where do you think it's at? Where should people start? What do you like?
I think, I'm not in the classroom right now, so all I have to go on is my 15-year-old daughter. So if you'll allow me to share another parent perspective, but for her right now, she spends all of her time on YouTube. It's interesting. She has people that she follows on YouTube. There are series of the kids, like the vlogging, where they're just videotaping their lives and living through it. It's like reality shows, and these kids are getting followers, and then they're getting sponsors, and they're making money. And so this is like replaced, I mean, she still binges Netflix, don't get me wrong, but this is replaced fiction for her. This is what she's watching. And so I'm wondering if maybe that I know that followers, the YouTube channels and things like that, that's a big deal in their world. And so to me, and I did see this when my 8th graders were just starting to do some stuff online. It was all about the followers, and YouTube was a big world for them, and I think it is right now still.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. Just in first grade the other day, we were working on Chatterpix, getting them into a QR code, and so we take them and put them onto a YouTube account at our school, and those first graders were helping me, and the first thing they wanted, you're putting it on YouTube? How can I find it? Well, I leave them unlisted, but they obviously, and then they would look at some of the past projects we've done, and the first thing they gravitated towards was how many views did it have? And so that was very interesting that you had said that, because I can totally relate to that with those kids and looking at that. But YouTube, I think, was very popular with kids right now. But that's a great question, Shaelynn, because I don't know, if I'm starting with a teacher, if I want to sit them down, I just had a couple teachers approach me in the last couple weeks here, and one's going with Weebly and one's going with Blogger. And I just tell them to just start, look at it as you're making your thinking. We're doing the ALP this year, the Adolescent Literacy Project, and really encouraging teachers to, they have to videotape themselves. And I encourage the blogging feature as to what were you thinking, when you were doing this. And I think anymore myself, that's what blogging's turned into, is I want to make my thinking visible to others, and what I might not be magnificent to me, but it might be meaningless really to me. I'm just blogging about something, but another teacher might say, "Whoa, that was amazing," and I think that's what it is, because we have some great things happening in our classroom, and I think we just need to create an audience. And if it's just our parents in our community, they need to see what's going on in our schools, and I think just with that teacher blogging and starting that process will happen.
That views thing is really powerful. When I first started publishing, I was using a program called Tack, and it has a number of views. And I had never published anything myself, but I presented at a state conference, and somebody just tweeted out my presentation that I had shared in the conference website, and all of a sudden I got all these views. And it took me aback, because there were like 700 views, and I knew only like 100 of those could have been my mother. I mean, the rest of them, they were by people I didn't know. So that's a powerful feeling. I feel like the world gets smaller then, and that's, I think, what happens with kids, is that you're realizing, oh my gosh, this is, or maybe it gets bigger. I don't know, but it does something to the way that you view the world, especially for those of us that are from these rural areas, because we're not in the big cities.
The idea of views it's interesting, but I always wonder, if will we take stock that how many people see it, and that's where we find our value in the view? Like, with that, and how do we caution ourselves not to find the value that we've created in how many people have seen it, but perhaps in the creation itself, or in the impact of that creation? I don't know. I have lots of thoughts on the view aspect, because something can be good and only have had 2 views. But is it the tree thing? Like, if a tree falls and no one hears it, does it go right to the view? I don't know. The other platform I'm really wondering about, and as a maybe microblogging or a publishing component of art and voice, would be Instagram. I don't know if you've seen more and more kids use that, but I've noticed that some high school students it's like their diary, their image a day, and have a post, and not necessarily connected to the classes or content or concept. It's just something they're doing. I wonder if that we'll see more prevalence with that too.
I think you're absolutely right. In Instagram, I don't know if it's likes. I think it is. I think it's likes that you get. and Snapchat too. Allie, my daughter's very into Snapchat too, and that's about putting, the image out there, and there's a story, like you have a Snapchat story now, which is kind of like your Facebook page, and it's, I think it's about the views for them, but then it's also about the likes. I mean, her mood can be based on how many likes she gets on something she posts. Whether she's making a comment or putting a picture up that she took. And it's interesting just watching her walk through the world. I feel like kids in general take pictures of everything now, or video. She walks through the mall with a different outlook than I do. She sees the world differently because she's looking, should I take a picture of that and share it with my audience? They have their followers and they have their communities, and it's just completely changed the way that she sees the world. And again, we're in a publishing thing, but we're kind of digressing, but it's an interesting thing that you made me think about, Erin. Thank you.
But it does make me think, do you think places like Snapchat and Vine will become those credible publishing places that, let's say, a blog or YouTube? I mean, I know that they're big and they're large and they have followings, but do you see that as a publishing platform?
It is for news. I mean, I don't know about students, but we can read the news through a Snapchat story. I don't know. I don't know.
I know that I don't read any news publications, but I keep up on what's happening in the world on Twitter and Facebook. I mean, those are mine because I'm a grown-up, so I don't have an Instagram, although I'm not saying grown-ups can't. But you're right, it is news, and it's publishing, but it certainly isn't publishing an article or a well-made video. I mean, it's just these, like you guys were calling it, the microblogging. It's just these little snapshots of what's happening in their world right then.
So sort of like two pieces on this. So one of them is, so Saba Kidwai wrote a great article last week about the idea of like, how could Snapchat, and you could replace the word Snapchat with Vine or any of these others, but her comment was like, how could we use it to help inspire empathy? Like, how could we encourage students to be publishing and to also be seeing what other people are publishing as a way to start to see the world through other people's eyes, and then start to make those connections with other people, so they're recognizing that, the world is bigger than them. I mean, I think it's really fun that all of us right now live in tiny little towns. Like, we're not in great big cities. We're not seeing a lot of the things that are happening in other places, and yet we can see the world through other people's eyes. So is it an opportunity, to start teaching the students how to look at it as more of just like, yeah, I shared what I ate for lunch today, but it's, when I'm doing that, here's what I'm doing to represent myself, and when I see what someone else is doing, here's how I can start to understand them better. And I really hadn't thought of it until she wrote that blog post, which I thought was interesting. And then, kind of circling back around too, like, is the microblogging, like, yes, it's publishing, but, it's not like a full article publishing. So how do we start, maybe as educators, to be teaching that balance? Like, when do we want to delve into something deeper? When do we need to synthesize in more than 140 characters? And how can we take advantage of all of the platforms? So that's just, I'm throwing that back at all of you. That's a loaded question-y statement.
Well, it's imperative that we teach the rhetorical triangle, that we teach that from young. We don't have to enter AP language, but that we think about what is your message and who should hear that message or who needs that message, and what is the best method to deliver the message and to reach that audience. And I think that would determine the what, where, how, when, how long, how much, with that, with that writing, just like a thank you note. I mean, there's something so powerful about a handwritten thank you note or a love note. I will not type an email to my husband on Valentine's Day. I will write with an ink pen a note to him. And I would hope that I would get that in return and not an email. I mean, there's just something about that, right? And so there's a time for that, just as there's a time for, in-depth writing or maybe the microblog. But to teach that and to have experiences with all of that, I think is imperative.
So I have sorry, a quick story, and then I have, what did you call it, Beth? Triad rhetorical questions to answer your questions. So the quick story is, I don't know, I'm sure most of you have heard of Humans of New York on Instagram. Well, there started popping up on my feed stories of Waukee, and it's a group of students in Iowa, and they're doing exactly what you were speaking about. They are producing a positive climate culture of inclusion and building empathy for students in their own building, and it's fantastic, and they push it through Instagram, blog, and I think YouTube, I don't know, but they push it multiple platforms, but it's exactly what you were talking about, Beth, so if you haven't seen it, check it out, Stories of Waukee. And the other triad rhetorical questions I was going to ask to kind of go along with that is, does space matter, and are teachers equipped with those design elements for someone to communicate their message through a snapshot or a Snapchat or a Vine when space is limited? And I have no third question, so Beth has to make that up, or Craig.
Craig, I think it's your turn then.
I'm just sitting back and enjoying. You guys are brilliant. I'll pass.
I'm curious about the question of space, though, because I think that's something that we don't always think about. It's like, how does publishing impact space and impact the teaching environment, impact the learning environment? I don't have an answer for it, but I know it was always interesting, and I'll take it back to sort of reality with teachers. I know when I first started setting things up in our school, we had a really interesting time where, like, I had a blog first for my classroom, and so I was putting everything up there mostly because I taught grades like 2 through 8, and I didn't want the kids to have to type in links. And so I'm like, if I have a blog and I post my lesson every day, they can just like click on things. So it started like really, really utilitarian, but then it became sort of the story of everything that was happening. And then the librarian's like, wait, I want to do this too. And so now the librarian's telling her story, and then 3rd and 4th grade were like, wait, no, we want to do this too. And so then we got them all set up. And so it was really interesting how we started, the classroom walls really started growing, because it wasn't just, okay, here's what happens inside, but we started letting more and more people in. And it was a very controlled process. It wasn't like we opened everything up, and to be perfectly honest, we didn't allow comments either. It was a one-way, like, we're just pushing this out there because we didn't feel that we really had built the community yet and had that understanding, and it was pretty early on. So most people didn't really understand it anyways. But it was kind of an interesting way to see what it did to the dynamic in the class, knowing that suddenly people could look in from the outside. It was like teaching in glass houses, the thing, like teaching in a glass house, I guess, at that point. So it became a really interesting experience, and people would stop you and be like, wow, I saw that you're doing this in your class. Why are you doing this? And it's like, ooh, maybe it's too much. I don't know.
Shaelynn, your space question, is that the space that we publish? Is that what you were asking? Does it matter where we publish? Is that
could be a triad itself, because I wasn't thinking the lens that Beth was. I was thinking more on the space in the amount of room a student has to express their thinking.
Oh.
And you just took it a totally different way, and so did Beth. So if Avra has another way, and Craig has a different way.
That's interesting, though, because like, if you look at Twitter and you think about how a tweet that has got an image with it, will get more comments or more likes or things like that. Kids know that. And I don't have an answer, but it's a really interesting thought process, because I know that with my daughter, her social media is kind of her thing right now. She's enrolled in online school, so she's not even face-to-face with kids every day. So her world is all social media and online education. And so she is very careful with what she shares at this point, because she wants feedback. And everything that she crafts is crafted deliberately for feedback. And honestly, I've become the same way in my personal social world on Facebook. I don't share every day all the time. I don't share what I'm eating for lunch, things like that. but I definitely will share a specific picture once in a while in hopes for, for more feedback. So maybe less sharing equals more feedback versus lots and lots of sharing. I don't know. It's just an interesting thought process.
Anyone else? Yeah, well, I think, guys, it's, I know, I'm the only East Coaster, so it's 7:53 my time. I know we're getting towards things, and Erin's got a wrestling match to go to, and Craig's still at school, and it's late, and he has a big day tomorrow. So I think, Avra, we might let you have the last say on that to wrap things up. This was a great conversation. This was a lot of fun. Again, for anyone who's watching, everything that everyone has talked about, I've actually just like randomly dropped into the slides that are below this video. And there's also, you can please, don't hesitate to get in touch with us. I put all of our contact information in there, so if anyone has questions, please don't hesitate to reach out, because we'd be more than happy to chat. And we're going to continue webinars next week, so if anyone else is joining in next week, we've actually got David Kwan, who's one of the creators of Go Formative. So we're going to do a little bit of a shift, talk about formative assessment. So anyone else should join us there. But with that, I'll let you guys say goodnight, and I'll thank everybody for joining us online, and many, many thanks to all of you. So,
Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Beth, so much. Great conversation.
So this was a ton of fun. We'll have to put a random tweet out another time and pick a different topic. So thanks very much for everybody, and have a great night.